The enormous crystal hall sparkled under dozens of different light sources as creatures from across the galaxy filled every seat. Today was the biggest day of the year for the Galactic Academic Exchange, where every world got to show off what made their species special. The air hummed with excited chatter in hundreds of languages, creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, growls, and musical tones. Ambassador Veltar from the Centauri Coalition leaned back in his floating chair, his four eyes scanning the crowd with casual interest. He had attended these events for 30 years, and while they were always educational, they followed a predictable pattern. The stronger species would flex their natural weapons, the smarter ones would demonstrate their telepathic abilities, and everyone would politely applaud before moving on to the next presentation. The day had started exactly as expected. The rock people from Granite Prime had taken the stage first, their bodies gleaming like living diamonds. When one of them casually punched through a steel plate with his bare fist, the audience had erupted in appreciative roars. Their skin was literally harder than most metals, evolved from countless generations of living inside active volcanoes. Next came the floaters from the gas giant Nimbus 7. These ethereal beings looked like living clouds, shifting and swirling as they moved. To demonstrate their abilities, one of them compressed himself down to the size of a marble, then expanded until he filled half the stage. Their ability to change density at will made them nearly impossible to capture or harm. The razor claws had followed, extending gleaming talons that could slice through titanium like butter. The crystal singers had demonstrated how their voices could shatter solid rock. The iron scales had shown off their natural armor that could deflect laser fire. Each species was more impressive than the last, each one a living weapon shaped by millions of years of evolution on deadly worlds. Then the announcer, a tall being with skin like polished copper, called out in his booming voice, "Next, representing the planet Earth, we have James Mitchell from the human delegation." A young man walked onto the stage, and the difference was immediately obvious. Where the previous speakers had been towering, armored, or ethereal, James looked completely ordinary. He stood about 6 feet tall with brown hair and wearing a simple blue suit. No claws, no armor plating, no glowing energy field surrounding him. He looked like he might work in an office somewhere. Veltar barely glanced up from the report he was reading. Humans had joined the galactic community only recently, and from what he had heard, they were pleasant enough but nothing special. They had no natural weapons, no impressive size, no obvious evolutionary advantages. They seemed to get by mainly on their curiosity and their willingness to trade with everyone. Several other delegates were having quiet conversations or checking their communication devices. The Granite Folk delegate was actually taking a nap, his diamond-hard body making soft, grinding sounds as he breathed. Even the normally polite crystal singers seemed distracted, their musical humming slightly off-key with boredom. James reached the podium and tapped the microphone twice, the sound echoing through the vast chamber. "Hello, everyone," he said with a warm, friendly smile that seemed genuine. "Thank you for having me here today. My name is James Mitchell, and I'm honored to represent Earth and tell you all about humanity." His voice was pleasant but unremarkable. No telepathic undertones like the mind readers, no harmonic resonance like the crystal singers, no intimidating growl like the predator species. Just a normal speaking voice that somehow managed to sound both confident and humble at the same time. The massive holographic display behind him flickered to life, showing a beautiful blue and green planet slowly rotating against the black of space. White clouds swirled across the surface, and the continents were clearly visible beneath them. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic. "I thought I'd start by telling you about our home world and some of our basic living conditions," James continued, still wearing that pleasant smile. "Nothing too complicated, just the everyday stuff that shapes who we are as a species." Veltar found himself actually looking up from his report, though he couldn't say why. There was something in the human's tone, a casual confidence that suggested there might be more to this presentation than he had initially thought. Around the chamber, a few other delegates were also starting to pay attention, though most were still clearly expecting a boring recitation of mundane planetary facts. James gestured to the spinning planet behind him, completely unaware that he was about to turn the entire galaxy's understanding of dangerous species completely upside down. James tapped a few buttons on his control pad, and a colorful pie chart appeared on a massive screen behind him. The chart showed different gases in bright colors, with oxygen taking up about a fifth of the circle in vivid red. "So let's start with what we breathe every day," James said, pointing at the chart with the same tone someone might use to describe their breakfast. "Our air is about 21% oxygen. Pretty straightforward stuff for us, though I know it creates what scientists call a highly reactive environment." He chuckled slightly and gestured around the room. "I guess that means most metals just sitting around in our air will start to rust and fall apart over time. We're so used to it that we have to specially treat our buildings and vehicles to stop them from corroding." In the third row, 3 delegates from Titan Station suddenly sat up straight, their methane-breathing apparatus making worried hissing sounds. One of them quickly activated his translator and whispered urgently to his companion. To their species, oxygen wasn't just reactive, it was pure poison that would kill them in seconds. James seemed completely oblivious to their distress as he moved on to the next slide. "Now, our gravity," he said with the same cheerful energy, "is about 9.8 meters per second squared. We think of this as totally normal, of course. Kids grow up running around in it, elderly people manage just fine, and our athletes can still jump and run without any problems." Ambassador Veltar felt his stomach drop as his brain implant quickly ran the calculations. He had visited many worlds, and he knew exactly what that number meant. His own homeworld had gravity barely half that strong, and even that was considered on the higher end for most species. The number James had just casually mentioned would literally crush the majority of beings in this room. Veltar looked around and saw similar expressions of shock spreading across the faces of delegates who had bothered to do the math. The feather folk from the low-gravity moons looked absolutely horrified. Their hollow bones would snap like twigs under that kind of pressure. "Weather-wise, we have a pretty pleasant setup," James continued, pulling up what looked like a colorful weather map. "Today, back home in Manchester, it's sitting at about 15 degrees Celsius. Nice and comfortable for a spring day." He smiled fondly at the image. "Though I have to say, last month we had quite the heat wave. Temperature got up to about 35 degrees for almost a week. Everyone was complaining about how hot it was, but honestly, it was kind of nice to get some real sunshine." A sharp gasp echoed from the left side of the chamber. One of the Frost Walker delegates had actually stood up from his seat, his crystalline blue body trembling. His species had evolved on a world where the warmest day in recorded history had been minus 10 degrees Celsius. The temperature James was describing as a pleasant spring day would literally melt their cellular structure. "Oh, and I should mention our star," James added with a laugh, as if he had just remembered something amusing. "It puts out quite a lot of radiation. More than most stars, from what I understand. We've actually evolved special protection for it." He pointed to his own skin, which looked perfectly normal to most of the audience. "This pigment we have, called melanin, helps shield us from the radiation. People like me with lighter skin have to be more careful. We use this artificial protection called sunscreen, or will literally burn from the radiation exposure." The word radiation sent a ripple of alarm through the chamber. Several species wore protective suits specifically because they couldn't handle even mild radiation exposure. The idea of a species that lived under intense radiation and treated it as a minor inconvenience was deeply unsettling. James noticed that the room had gone unusually quiet. The constant buzz of conversation that had filled the air during previous presentations had completely stopped. Hundreds of eyes, sensors, and various other sensory organs were now focused entirely on him. "Is everything all right?" James asked, looking genuinely concerned. "I hope my translator is working properly. I know sometimes these technical details can get lost in translation." Around the chamber, delegates were frantically checking their translation devices, certain that something had gone wrong. The numbers couldn't be right. No species could survive in conditions that extreme. Yet the human standing on stage looked completely healthy and was describing these deadly conditions as if they were the most normal thing in the world. Veltar found himself leaning forward in his chair, no longer able to focus on anything except the pleasant young man who was casually describing what sounded like the most hostile planet anyone had ever heard of, and they were only just getting started. James rubbed his hands together with obvious excitement, like a teacher about to share his favorite subject with class. The holographic display shifted to show a detailed diagram of human anatomy, with all the major organs clearly labeled in bright colors. Now, this is where things get really interesting, James said, his voice filled with genuine enthusiasm. Let me tell you about how our bodies actually work, because honestly, even we find it pretty amazing sometimes. He pointed to the circulatory system highlighted in red on the diagram. See all these blood vessels? We got about 5 liters of blood pumping through our bodies at all times. But here's the crazy part. We can lose up to 40% of that blood and still survive. Several medical delegates in the audience exchanged alarmed glances. Most species would go into fatal shock after losing even 10% of their blood volume. I know it sounds impossible, James continued with a cheerful shrug, but humans are incredibly tough to kill that way. Our bodies just adapt. The heart pumps faster, the remaining blood vessels contract, and somehow we keep going long enough to get help. He clicked to the next slide, showing the skeletal system. And our bones, now that's really something special. When we break a bone, which happens pretty regularly since we're always doing dangerous things, it doesn't just heal back to normal. James tapped the screen where a healed fracture was highlighted. The bone actually grows back stronger than it was before. The break point becomes the strongest part of the entire bone. It's like our bodies learn from the injury and decide to upgrade that spot. In the medical section of the audience, Dr. Elizabeth Harper smiled and nodded. She had seen this phenomenon countless times during her years as a trauma surgeon, and it never ceased to amaze her colleagues from other species. But the really incredible part is our immune system, James said, and his grin widened. We basically carry around our own personal army everywhere we go. The display shifted to show microscopic images of white blood cells moving through blood vessels. These little warriors patrol our entire body, hunting down anything that doesn't belong there. Viruses, bacteria, toxins. They track them down and destroy them. He clicked to a video showing white blood cells actually chasing and engulfing foreign particles. Look at that. They literally hunt down threats like tiny soldiers. Some of them can even remember enemies they've fought before, so if the same threat shows up again, they're ready for it. The chamber had gone completely silent now. Many species relied on external protection or avoided contaminated environments entirely, but humans apparently carried biological warfare inside their own bodies. Now, before we developed farming, humans were what we call persistence predators, James said, and there was definite pride in his voice. We didn't have big claws or massive teeth, so we developed a different hunting strategy. He showed an image of early humans running across a plain. We would pick out an animal, maybe something much bigger and stronger than us, and we would just start chasing it, not trying to catch it right away, just following it at a steady pace. James began walking back and forth across the stage, demonstrating the concept. The animal would run away, of course, much faster than us initially, but then it would get tired and have to rest. And when it stopped to rest, we would still be coming, always coming. A visible shudder ran through the herbivorous delegates. Several of the grass eaters actually moved their chairs back from the stage. The animal would run again, rest again, run again. James continued, still pacing. But we never stopped. We just kept following hour after hour, until eventually the animal was so exhausted it just collapsed. Then we would walk up and finish the job. He paused and smiled at the audience. We called it persistence hunting, and it worked so well that we became the dominant species on our planet, using nothing but our ability to never give up. The rapid burst delegates looked absolutely terrified. Their species could run at incredible speeds, faster than almost any other creature in the galaxy, but only for short bursts. The idea of being slowly, relentlessly hunted by something that never tired was their species' ultimate nightmare. Even today, we still have that same stamina, James said cheerfully. Humans regularly run for hours without stopping. We have these events called marathons where thousands of people run 26 miles just for fun. Some of our ultramarathoners run over 100 miles in a single day because they enjoy the challenge. He clicked to photos of smiling humans crossing finish lines, looking tired but happy. And that's just the recreational stuff. Our military personnel can march for days with heavy equipment. Our workers can labor for 10 or 12 hours straight. We just don't get tired the same way most species do. Oh, and our healing abilities, James added, almost as an afterthought. Cut us, and we seal up the wound automatically. Break our bones, and they mend themselves. We could even regrow certain tissues if we damage them. He pulled up medical case files that made several delegates gasp out loud. Some humans have survived falling out of airplanes, being struck by lightning multiple times, or being frozen nearly solid. There are cases of people losing limbs and still fighting or having massive injuries and walking for miles to get help. James looked out at the completely silent audience with mild confusion. Is everything okay? You all seem a bit quiet. I hope I'm not boring you with too many medical details. What he couldn't see was that half the delegates were frantically taking notes while the other half were calculating how quickly they could get back to their ships. James clapped his hands together and his expression brightened even more, if that was possible. All right, I think I've covered the basic physical stuff pretty well. But honestly, the really fascinating part about humans isn't our bodies. It's how our minds work and what we do for fun. The holographic display switched to show a collection of photos that immediately caught everyone's attention. The images showed humans sitting comfortably next to various Earth creatures, some of which looked decidedly dangerous. These are what we call pets, James explained with obvious affection. They're animals that live in our homes with us, like family members. This big guy here is Max. He belongs to my neighbor Tom. Max is a German shepherd, and he's descended directly from wolves. James pointed to the image of a large, powerful-looking animal sitting next to a small human child who was hugging it around the neck. Wolves, as you might know, are pack hunters with incredibly strong jaws and razor-sharp teeth, but we bred them over thousands of years to be our companions. Now, they sleep in our beds and play with our children. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the audience. Most species went to great lengths to avoid predators, not invite them into their homes. And this lovely lady here is Whiskers. She lives with Mrs. Thompson down the street from me. James continued, showing a photo of a small, furry creature with bright green eyes. She's what we call a house cat, basically a miniature version of the big cats that hunt on our savannas. Tigers, lions, leopards, all the same family. The image showed the cat curled up peacefully in an elderly woman's lap, purring contentedly. Cats are incredible hunters. They can see in almost complete darkness, move without making a sound, and their reflexes are faster than almost anything on our planet. So naturally, we keep them as pets and let them sleep on our furniture. By now, several delegates were openly staring in disbelief. The concept of voluntarily living with predators seemed completely insane to most species. But that's nothing compared to what we do for entertainment, James said, and his enthusiasm kicked up another notch. The screen filled with video footage that made half the audience gasp out loud. These are called extreme sports, James explained as the video showed humans throwing themselves off towering cliffs with nothing but fabric wings strapped to their backs. We actively seek out the most dangerous situations we can find because we think they're exciting. The video cut to humans climbing up vertical rock faces with their bare hands, hundreds of feet above jagged rocks below. Rock climbing is incredibly popular. The goal is to climb as high as possible with minimal safety equipment. The more dangerous the climb, the more impressive it is. Ambassador Veltar was scribbling notes so frantically that his 3 hands were shaking. His species considered a 20-foot fall to be potentially fatal. Yet these humans were treating 1,000-foot drops as recreational activities. Oh, and here's one of my personal favorites. James said as the video switched to underwater footage. Shark cage diving. Humans pay money to be lowered into waters full of massive predators with teeth the size of daggers, protected by nothing but thin metal bars. The footage showed enormous sharks ramming into metal cages, while humans inside laughed and took pictures. Some of the more adventurous ones even swim with the sharks without any protection at all. They call it free diving with sharks. But perhaps the most interesting thing about human psychology, James continued, his voice taking on a warm, nostalgic tone, is how we raise our children. We tell them bedtime stories specifically designed to terrify them, and somehow this helps them sleep better. The screen showed images of children's books with titles like Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, and The Three Little Pigs. These stories feature monsters that eat children, witches who cook kids in ovens, and wolves that blow down houses. The more frightening the story, the more children love it. James smiled fondly at the images. I remember my grandmother reading me stories about dragons that burned entire villages, giants that ground bones to make bread, and monsters that lived under my bed. I slept like a baby after every story. A delegate from the peaceful meadow worlds, a species that told their children only stories about flowers and gentle rain, suddenly went pale and toppled backward in his chair, completely unconscious. And when it comes to survival, James said, seemingly oblivious to the growing panic around him, humans have this remarkable ability to just adapt and keep going no matter what happens to us. The display showed a timeline of Earth's history, marked with various catastrophic events. Ice ages that covered most of our planet in glaciers. We adapted. Massive volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for years. We found ways to survive. Asteroid impacts that wiped out most other life forms. We made it through. James pointed to different points on the timeline. Plagues that killed half our population, natural disasters that destroyed entire civilizations, wars that lasted for decades. We've been through it all. And every time, we not only survive but come back stronger. He turned to face the audience with that same pleasant smile he'd worn throughout the entire presentation. We actually have a saying about this kind of thing. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We genuinely believe that surviving terrible experiences improves us as individuals and as a species. The chamber had gone so quiet that the only sounds were the mechanical hums of various life support systems and the occasional whimper from particularly distressed delegates. James looked around the room with mild concern. I hope I haven't been going too fast, he said kindly. I know there's a lot of information to process. Should I slow down a bit? Or would you like me to move on to how all of this shapes our approach to interstellar diplomacy? What James couldn't see was that most of the audience was no longer taking notes about human culture. They were calculating how quickly they could update their species' threat assessment protocols. James took a step back from the podium and spread his arms wide, his face lighting up with the kind of genuine smile that had made him popular back home in Manchester. The holographic display behind him shifted to show images of humans and various alien species working together, scientists sharing research, engineers collaborating on projects, and diplomats shaking hands, tentacles, and various other appendages. Now, after everything I've told you about humanity, I want to make one thing absolutely clear, James said, his voice filled with sincere warmth. Despite all these physical and cultural traits we developed, humans are completely committed to peaceful cooperation with every single species in this galaxy. He gestured toward the images of cooperation behind him. We genuinely believe that diversity makes all of us stronger. Every species brings something unique to the table. Your incredible technologies, your different ways of thinking, your various perspectives on solving problems. We're not here to compete or dominate. We're here to learn, to share, and to build something amazing together. James turned and pointed to several spots in the audience where other humans were sitting. I'd like you to meet some of my colleagues who came with me today. Dr. Michael Roberts over there is one of our leading xenobiologists. He spent his entire career studying how different species adapt to their environments, and he's absolutely fascinated by what he's learned about all of your worlds. A middle-aged man with graying hair stood up briefly and waved. He looked like the kind of person who would spend hours excitedly discussing scientific papers over coffee. Captain Lisa Anderson, there is one of our top engineers. James continued, pointing to a woman in a crisp uniform. She's been working on designs for universal life support systems that could accommodate multiple species on the same ships. She believes that if we're going to explore the galaxy together, we need to make sure everyone can breathe comfortably while we do it. Captain Anderson nodded professionally to the crowd, her demeanor suggesting someone who solved complex problems for a living. And William Davis, our head diplomat, has been studying galactic law and customs for years, so he can make sure we follow all the proper protocols for establishing peaceful relationships. James smiled at the distinguished-looking man in the formal suit. He's probably memorized more alien etiquette rules than most species know about their own cultures. Davis stood and bowed respectfully, clearly someone who took diplomatic protocol very seriously. We're hoping to establish cultural exchange programs where our people can live and work on your worlds, and your people can experience life on Earth. James continued enthusiastically. We want joint research initiatives where we can combine human persistence and creativity with your advanced technologies and knowledge. And of course, we're looking for long-term partnerships in exploration, trade, and mutual defense. The silence in the chamber was so complete that James could hear the subtle humming of the air recycling systems. He looked around the room, expecting to see the kind of polite interest or enthusiastic responses that usually follow diplomatic presentations. Instead, he saw hundreds of faces, sensors, and optical organs staring at it with expressions he couldn't quite interpret. James glanced back at his colleagues, wondering if something was wrong with his presentation. Dr. Roberts gave him an encouraging thumbs up. Captain Anderson nodded approvingly, and William Davis smiled and made a small keep-going gesture. "Is everything all right?" James asked, genuine concern creeping into his voice. "I hope my translator is working properly. Sometimes technical specifications don't translate well between languages, and I know I covered a lot of ground pretty quickly." Ambassador Veltar slowly rose from his seat, his forelegs trembling slightly as he stood. His voice shook when he spoke, and his usually confident diplomatic tone was replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. You call your world peaceful?" he asked, his words barely above a whisper. James brightened immediately, apparently relieved that someone was finally engaging with his presentation. "Oh, yes, absolutely," he replied cheerfully. "Earth is quite lovely, really. Very peaceful and pleasant compared to what it used to be like in our earlier history." He pulled up one more image showing modern Earth cities with their parks, clean rivers, and blue skies. "We've ended most of our major conflicts, cleaned up our environment, and established global cooperation on almost everything. Our crime rates are at historic lows. We've eliminated most diseases, and we've created a pretty comfortable society for everyone. It's actually quite nice to live there now." James paused and chuckled softly. "I mean, compared to the old days when we had world wars and constant fighting, modern Earth is practically a paradise. We're very proud of how peaceful we've become." The effect of these words on the audience was immediate and dramatic. 23 different delegates simultaneously reached for their emergency communication devices, activating protocols that hadn't been used in decades. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of urgent whispers, panic clicking, and the high-pitched whines of various species distress calls. Within 6 hours of James's presentation ending, the Galactic Council convened its first emergency session in over 3 centuries. Delegates arrived from across the galaxy, many of them traveling at dangerous speeds to reach the emergency meeting on time. The session lasted 18 hours, with breaks only for species that required specific atmospheric conditions to survive extended debates. The final vote was unanimous. Earth was immediately reclassified as a Class X DEATHWORLD, a category that had previously been purely theoretical, reserved for planets so impossibly hostile that they couldn't possibly support life. Humans were simultaneously designated a protected species, but not for the reasons most species receive that classification. Usually, the designation was meant to protect weak or vulnerable species from exploitation. In humanity's case, the protection was clearly intended to work in the opposite direction. 3 days later, James Mitchell boarded his transport ship back to Earth, carrying a briefcase full of formal diplomatic documents. He was confused but delighted by the response his presentation had received. 46 different species had approached him personally to express urgent interest in establishing what they called mutually beneficial non-aggression and eternal friendship treaties with humanity. As his ship entered Earth's atmosphere, James pulled out his official report tablet and began typing his summary of the mission. After thinking for a moment, he wrote, "Mission successful. Presentation well received. Everyone seems very eager to be friends. Recommend immediate follow-up on the numerous partnership opportunities that were offered." He submitted the report with a smile, completely unaware that back at Galactic Council headquarters, his presentation had been classified as the most terrifying intelligence briefing in recorded history, and that his cheerful description of Earth as, quite peaceful had become the basis for new diplomatic protocols regarding contact with apex predator species. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again.